This podcast is brought to you by Tri-County Speaks, serving survivors of sexual assault in Berkeley, Charleston, and Dorchester counties.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ariana Keels, and welcome back for another Tri-County Speaks podcast episode. So today we will be talking about victims versus survivors, and joining me in this conversation, I have Bradley and Brittany. So Bradley and Brittany, can you introduce yourselves? Let us know what you do within Tri-County Speaks agency, and just let listeners know more about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Bradley Burris. My pronouns are they, them, she, hers. I am the Prevention Education Coordinator for Tri-County Speaks, which just means any prevention efforts or education in the community is something that I spend a lot of my time doing.
And I am Brittany Green, and I am the Berkeley County Victim Service Advocate for Tri-County Speaks. And my job is essentially case management, referrals, support groups, providing support to our victims and survivors.
Thank you guys so much for joining me. So as I said a few seconds ago, we're talking about victims versus survivors. So per my favorite thing, let's talk about legal definitions, and then we'll kind of break it down to see how that varies from how Tri-County Speaks defines victims and survivors. So the legal definition for a victim is an individual who is an independent participant in the criminal case under federal or state victims' rights laws. Pretty generic, pretty much saying victims are participants in the court case, not necessarily a party to the case. And when I think about victims specifically, legally anyway, a lot of people don't know that in criminal cases, victims aren't parties to a case. So when a crime happens, it's a crime against the public. So if something happened with me, I wouldn't be the plaintiff. It would be the state in a criminal case, and then the defendant stays the same. When we're thinking about survivors, the legal term is an individual who is being targeted for abuse. And even in the definition, it says they sometimes may be referred to as victims. So that definition is confusing, in my opinion, because we use them pretty interchangeably in our work. So I thought it was really important to bring it, to the table so we could talk about how Tri-County Speaks defines it, and if even within our agency we use it differently. So let's start with Brittany. What do you think? What's the difference between the two for you?
For me, I think a lot of it is just kind of based on how a person identifies in that moment. I think that the journey between victimhood and survivorship, I think that is definitely very fluid and can change depending on how the person feels about what happened to them, what they may be experiencing, and where in their journey they're at. But for me, I would say identifying as a victim of sexual assault can be like the moment of validation of a lot of people question their victimhood. They question if they were a victim of an assault. They question if they, deserve a recovery or their help or assistance and support. And so for me, I believe it is important that we don't stigmatize victimhood and survivorship. I don't know if those are the correct words, but those are the words that I'm using today. But it's kind of a mode of this happened to you, you're figuring out how to accept it, you're working towards getting healthy and recovering from what happened, you're getting your life back into your own hands. And with the survivor, that is more so you've gone through a lot of things and you're coming out on the other end. That typically has a connotation of like ending, like that suffering and that pain ending, which that isn't necessarily true, but I know that that's something that a lot of people kind of feel and see and use to determine what they want to be called. But I think that looking at it from a mental health standpoint, it's whatever you feel in that moment, because there are some moments where you're going to feel like you've overcome and you're stronger now. And then there are going to be some moments where you're so overwhelmed that you feel like a victim. And both of those titles, in my opinion, are valid.
What about you, Bradley? Do you agree, disagree, somewhere in between?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with everything that Ariana and Brittany have said. When we think of the word victim, I think automatically we're ingrained to think of a crime occurred, something was done and impacted a person in a negative way. So to me, like victim has a very clinical term, whereas survivor, it inherently provokes resiliency. It provokes, this healing aspect to it. So I think that it is a very individualized experience. If you're having a day where you feel more that something bad happened, you might identify as a victim, right? This thing happened to me. I had no part in it. I place no blame. It doesn't define me. Then maybe that day use the word victim. When you're talking about your experience, your healing journey, the resiliency, your recovery, your journey through that, you may use survivor. And at our agency, we pay very close attention to how someone defines themselves. If they use the word victim over and over and over again when they're talking to us, we're absolutely going to mirror that language. And the same thing goes for survivor. And I truly believe that neither one of them is better than the other. It's 100% up to that individual person to decide what's best for them. And we try to be very conscious of using both when we're giving presentations or informing the community.
I think for me, I definitely use them pretty interchangeably. If I was going to be like a strict, format of when I use them and how I use them, when I'm doing a hospital accompaniment, when the person goes into the ED or the emergency room at MUSC to get that safe done, they might be a victim when they walk in. But knowing that they took the steps to reclaim the power that they may have lost and, getting that done because it's an extensive exam. But once they leave that hospital, they're a survivor. So that's one way that I would say I generally have used it. But like Bradley said, definitely mirroring the language. And some people don't like to even use either, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know I've had some clients that have used the word my incident or what happened to me or the occurrence. And they just want to be themselves, which is fair. Your identity is fluid. It's constantly changing. And I think with victims and survivors, how you feel about yourself and how you feel about what happened can change. I mean, we have the term re-victimization for a reason, because you could be so far in your process and then something happens, a triggering event, and you could feel, taking steps back, which is common, unfortunately, but it's something that, we have to talk about, we have to express, because once something traumatic happens, whether that's sexual assault or any other situation, it could be a car accident, you could be a victim of that and you could be triggered. So I think it's important to think about it in those terms as well.
Also, Ariana, you just made me think of this too. Sometimes I feel like victims or survivors may feel like the word survivor is forced on them. It's really commodified right now, like meaning that we have so many people coming forward. There's so many documentaries, articles that the word survivor is kind of pushed on us. And if you are someone who is fed up with media and portrayals, and maybe sometimes you feel like people are just supporting survivors because it's trendy, that is okay. You do not have to use a word that someone else has come up with to define you. Like Ariana said, I think it's really important to highlight that it's an experience. You can define it however you want and how you choose to, and that is 100% okay and should be accepted by everybody that is a part of your life.
Absolutely. I think I think the focus on survivor recently, especially with the media, is trying to be empowering. But for some people that never get a chance to really be a victim, they're looked at as something happened to you, you need to get over it, you survived it, you're better for this now, you're stronger now. But I think it's important that for people that need it to be able to feel confident and feel the empathy and compassion from other people in when they describe themselves as a victim. Because I know a lot of people are very, very quick to rush over that into now you're strong, now you're resilient. But it's like, oh, but right now I'm hurting, and it's okay for me to be hurting. It's okay for me to deal with this in an emotional way, because what happens is everything that happens to us is emotional. So I think that that's a really important thing to note.
Yeah, and I think also just tying into what Brittany said, that just because someone was, uh, violently attacked or something happened that we would classify as like victimization, that doesn't mean they always categorize themselves as a victim in the situation as well. So there's not a cookie cutter standard way of how people react when something bad happens or a trauma occurs. And as people and as a community, we shouldn't try to fit someone into a box in that way. If someone was sexually assaulted, there's not one way to react, one way to look, one way to be after something like that happened. And I think that's just unique to folks, and that's something to keep in mind as well, is that just because someone was sexually assaulted doesn't mean they're gonna not want to talk to people. They're not gonna want to continue to do daily life things. They're not gonna do X, Y, or Z, or they're gonna present certain symptoms, right? And I know we have a short conversation in another video about why we should believe victims and survivors of sexual assault. And I think that's a part of it. I think when people really think about what a victim looks like or what a survivor looks like, they have this idea of what it should or should not be, or what it should or should not look like. And I think that's a good reason why, an important reason why I thought this discussion, and we thought this discussion was important to bring to folks, is that regardless of what people call themselves, regardless of how people label something, it's one of those things that's unique to a person, right? And that's something that I really want everyone to remember.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if we're venturing into the part of what we want people to take away from this, is that language is important. And if trauma is not a binary thing. There's not just two ways to describe it. So if someone is using language and it doesn't match you, it doesn't identify with you, it doesn't truly describe how you feel, don't be confined by it. Describe it, define it, use whatever language best fits you. And once again, if you have people in your life who aren't accepting that language, that's on them. It's not on you.
Absolutely. I mean, your recovery is for you. And I think a lot of times people do get consumed by how they think everyone in their life should see their recovery, but it's all you. It's all you. And what other people want to call you or say about you, that's a them issue. It's not a you issue. Your priority is doing what's right and what's best for yourself. And I think we can get very caught up in, well, I'm supposed to be this and I'm supposed to be that, or I should do this or I should do that. There is no shoulds, there is no supposed to. It is what is best for you in your mental, spiritual, emotional, physical health.
And I think one key takeaway that kind of resounds through the agency is that if you know someone that's a victim or a survivor of sexual assault and they need someone to talk to, or you need someone to talk to because they've approached you, call our hotline. We have a 24-hour hotline. We'll link that number below or in the caption, just so you guys know that we are here for you, whether that's a loved one, a friend, partner, or the victim or survivor with questions or just additional support. We're here to support you.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So as always, this is just the start of a conversation, but we wanted to give you a little information to get that conversation started.